What would you do if the man you've been watching on TV for over a decade, the one who always smiles, bargains, and shakes hands with families, was secretly running one of the most terrifying child trafficking networks in modern history? The image of Rick Harrison that you know may completely change when you uncover the secrets hidden behind the curtain. I raided Rick Harrison's underground tunnels, and what I saw still keeps me up at night. This wasn't the kind of door you'd accidentally find hidden beneath a dusty carpet in what looks like a normal storage room. It's located right behind Rick Harrison's vast estate in Las Vegas, and those dark secrets have been hidden for so many years. Don't forget to leave a comment with the number 1 if you sympathize with Rick Harrison, or number 0 if you have a different opinion. If you're curious about the truth behind this, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on what happens next. The entrance appeared to have been unopened for years, yet there was something about how the surrounding area had been recently disturbed, how the edges of the rug were cleaner than the rest that made us stop. It was 3:42 p.m. when we found it. I remember the exact time because the air changed. The entire atmosphere grew heavier. We didn't know what we were about to discover, actually, we didn't. But deep down inside, I think each one of us knew we had stepped into something dark, something wrong. This is not your average investigation. This is not a typical raid or check based on vague information. This is a full-scale federal raid with the involvement of members from the FBI's Organized Crime and Human Trafficking Division. Rick Harrison was arrested just a week before on money laundering charges and suspicion of human trafficking, which at first glance seemed completely at odds with the man so many people knew from TV, the beloved pawn shop personality of America, the fast-talking, quick-witted Rick, who made audiences laugh for years on Pawn Stars, suddenly becoming the center of a shocking case that rocked the entertainment world. But there were no documents, no court transcripts or media leaks, not even the arrest compared to what we found in the tunnels we were tasked with searching. Storage rooms, possibly hidden cash, possibly ledgers, possibly blackmail documents, but what we found was something no one could have imagined. Beneath Rick Harrison's modest estate was a labyrinth of underground rooms and passageways, some unfinished, others seemingly lived in, but it was the passageways that made us stop. The passageways that still haunt me every time I close my eyes, decorated like a child's playroom, filled with toys, small furniture, costumes, chalk drawings taped to the walls, a scratched white rocking horse with one missing eye and no children in sight. That moment will stay with me forever. The silence in those tunnels was deafening. No laughter, no footsteps, only the creaking floorboards above and the stale air. The breath of silence underground had no logical explanation for what we were seeing. There was no reason why a man without children living in the house would have not just one, but many rooms filled with children's items. Yet they were there. Low beds close to the ground, neatly hung pajamas like in a nursery, a mural on one wall of the sun and rainbow painted with trembling brushstrokes, and on a table in the corner of the room was a pair of pink socks folded neatly beside a teacup and a plastic doll missing one leg. Who had been down there? Why were these rooms built this way? And more importantly, what were they used for? These questions would soon become the center of an expanding federal investigation. But on that first day, at that first moment, all we could do was stare. I remember one of the agents, a man who had worked overseas many times and witnessed horrific things during drug cartel raids in South America, whispered to himself, "This feels really evil. No words describe it better." And it wasn't just the runes leaving traces, but also the feeling that someone had been watching us, that we were being observed from some hidden vantage point. At first, it seemed like paranoia, but that changed when we found the first camera hidden inside what looked like an old teddy bear. A tiny pinhole lens had been cleverly drilled into one of its black button eyes. It had been transmitting footage through a wireless router hidden in the ceiling. We found 4 more similar devices and several different toys and stuffed animals in the playroom. When everything shifted from surreal to terrifying surveillance inside what seemed like a safe space for children, and nothing was recorded, nothing reported, no one knew it even existed, no neighbors, no real estate developers, not even local police, to understand the scale of what was happening, we needed to go back several months earlier when the first whispers of something strange reached the authorities. An anonymous tip was submitted online claiming that strange deliveries were being made at odd hours to Rick's property, including unmarked trucks and containers not following traditional supply routes. The initial report was ignored, but then another report came in. This time from a former employee who claimed they were told never to enter a certain warehouse in the backyard, not even to clean it, and had been abruptly fired when they asked about a strange mannequin the size of a child they saw being brought into the house. The employee's name was kept confidential for safety reasons, but their statement was the driving force behind the preliminary surveillance and financial audit. After that audit, a large sum of money was found being transferred through shell companies linked to Rick. What was more concerning was that many of the recipient accounts were traced back to known human trafficking hotspots in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, enough for the FBI to assemble a task force, and that's how we ended up there, standing in that tunnel, staring at a room meant for someone with no voice to speak for themselves. I wish I could say that was the worst part, but the tunnel went deeper than the playroom. It was what appeared to be a small performance space, an area with curtains and a couch facing the wall where a projector once sat. At first, no one knew exactly what kind of performance, but in a nearby locked drawer, agents found a drive filled with footage labeled only by numbers and dates. The contents of those files were immediately transferred to a forensic team and sealed under federal orders. But I heard things that day from people I trust, from experts who had handled some of the most disturbing trafficking cases in the world. They said it was unimaginably bad. Too bad to believe stories like this about people we thought we knew. No one wants to imagine that behind a reality TV show, the smiles could conceal a dark, secret maze so sinister that grown agents wept over what they saw. But it's the truth. I was there, I saw the rooms, I touched the toys, I heard the silence, and it changed everything. This isn't just about one man, it's about how evil lurks right before our eyes, how one person can live 2 lives. A life above ground filled with light and laughter, and a life underground. Buried in the dark, whispering truths too horrific to speak of. This video will take you through everything we discovered that day, and everything we've learned since, from traces of money to chilling evidence, from testimonies of former employees to psychological implications about the purpose of these rooms. You'll hear things the public has never known. You'll see how the beloved TV personality began to crack under the weight of the truth, and most importantly, you'll understand why we're just at the beginning of uncovering something much bigger than the downfall of one man. If you think the story ends in those tunnels, think again. That was just the entrance. The news didn't explode in a dramatic television moment like some might expect. There were no flashing red banners or prime-time reveals. It all started as a whisper within the industry, a quiet ripple soon exploding into a storm. Rick Harrison, the face of the long-running TV show Pawn Stars, was arrested on charges of money laundering and, more disturbingly, suspicion of involvement in human trafficking. To understand how such a public figure, a man who built a brand synonymous with American antiques and negotiating, found himself at the center of one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in recent memory, you have to rewind months, even years. The first signs that something was wrong didn't come from law enforcement, but from Rick's very financial ecosystem. According to multiple sources close to the investigation, irregularities had been quietly discovered by an internal audit. The company hired to assess one of Harrison's lesser-known business ventures, a shell company registered in Nevada under the name Silver West Acquisitions. On paper, the company appeared to handle rare collectible transactions and niche businesses, aligning with Rick's brand. However, what stood out to the auditors were large money transfers, often in cash or digital currency, moving in and out of accounts without clear business purposes. One day, an electronic transfer to a logistics company in the Philippines, tens of thousands of dollars sent to a customs agent in Serbia, money that didn't match any inventory, no invoices, no shipments related to these transactions, nothing made sense. The report was quietly escalated. Law enforcement was contacted, and as soon as they uncovered the first clue, everything started to unravel. Rick Harrison always portrayed himself as a serious businessman on Pawn Stars. He came across as sharp, savvy, and sometimes sardonic, the kind of person who knew a deal when he saw it and wasn't afraid to make it. Forget it if the numbers don't add up. The viewers trust him. His image is pristine. He seems grounded, patriotic, even without the cameras. According to several investigative sources, a much darker and more complex picture began to emerge. Court records later made public revealed that Rick wasn't just laundering money through shell companies, but he was allegedly involved in a network of brokers and traffickers operating under the guise of import-export businesses, particularly in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. These organizations moved people hidden within shipments of furniture, electronics, and antiques in an industry that aligned with Rick's business profile. What initially raised suspicion became undeniable when a series of bank accounts linked to Rick's name and the parent company of Pawn Stars LLC were traced to suspicious deposits totaling over $4.7 million in just 6 months. Some of these deposits matched known trafficking routes previously flagged by the FBI and human trafficking cases. No longer just speculation, the government acted quietly. Initially, surveillance was deployed and informants were activated. One of the most damning moments came when a former associate agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for immunity. This individual, whose name remains protected under a court order, is believed to have played a key role in handling logistics for some of Rick's lesser-known investments, including the now infamous properties on the outskirts of Las Vegas. This associate revealed something chilling. Rick insisted on renovating one of his properties, an underground construction unauthorized by city planners and not recorded with zoning boards. The work was done at night, with workers, mostly undocumented laborers, mobilized through third-party contractors and paid in cash. This associate claimed Rick was obsessed with keeping the construction secret, even threatening anyone who asked. There were clauses for immediate termination and non-disclosure about what was being built. At the time, no one knew, but looking back, it was clear that these renovations were the tunnels we would later walk through. Those rooms, those tunnels, would soon shock the nation. But what astonished both investigators and the public wasn't just the underground world Rick was allegedly building, but how he kept it hidden from the public. He continued filming episodes, posing with fans, appearing at auctions and conferences, all while behind his carefully crafted image, he was accused of coordinating international transactions and expanding a network that thrived on secrecy, exploitation, and silence. The public's reaction to Rick's arrest was initially a mix of skepticism and cautious disbelief. Loyal fans flooded social media to defend him, memes circulated, comparing the accusations to bad jokes. After all, wasn't this the guy who bartered baseball cards and Civil War rifles? The idea that Rick Harrison could be involved in such a nefarious operation. At first, this operation seemed absurd, but then evidence began to surface on media outlets, with news breaking about a federal order issued by a judge in Nevada. Documents outlined detailed allegations of extortion, human trafficking, and conspiracy to engage in illegal international business transactions, not just money laundering. The allegations pointed to a much deeper level of corruption requiring cross-border cooperation, digital footprints, and well-funded infrastructure to maintain. More than 25 pieces of evidence were listed in the arrest warrant, including encrypted text messages, photos, seized financial ledgers, and vehicle routes tracked by GPS. The weight of the law was still coming down. Rick denied all charges through his legal team. He declared his innocence, calling the investigation a coordinated smear campaign by jealous competitors and government overreach. His attorneys filed to dismiss the case due to a lack of specific evidence linking him directly to any human trafficking activities, but the federal prosecutors remained firm. They argued that circumstantial evidence alone painted a damning picture and promised that more was to come. And indeed it did. One of the most shocking developments was the raid on Rick's private storage facility in Henderson, Nevada. It was believed to be a simple warehouse for storing collectibles, but when investigators arrived, they discovered something entirely different. Hidden behind a mobile shelf containing old cash registers and jukeboxes, they found a locked room filled with safe deposit boxes, surveillance drives, and records that contradicted Rick's claims of ignorance. Among the items seized was a hard drive containing surveillance footage from inside his residence. The footage included time-stamped clips from inside the tunnels. The videos didn't show everything. Much of the content was corrupted, possibly deleted or encrypted, but it was still enough to sketch a troubling picture of secret movements controlled within the underground structure. Shadows passed over cameras, strange lights at odd hours, and in one clip, an unidentified man is seen walking down a hallway carrying what appeared to be a child's backpack. This footage, combined with witness testimony, financial traces, and international connections, provided the federal case with a solid foundation. By the time Rick was officially charged, the tone of reporting shifted from skepticism to horror, but the case wasn't fully formed at that time. Only after the raid on Rick's estate, the raid I witnessed, did the full scale of the new nightmare become clear. that the raid was not intended to uncover any tangible items, but to validate classified documents, financial records, and pinpoint potential safe deposit boxes. What no one imagined we would find was what we did. No one ever thought that beneath the foundation of one of the most famous houses in Las Vegas, there would be a network of playrooms, cameras, and secret passageways with no official blueprints, no permits, and no explanation. How long have others known about this? What about those who frequently visited his estate? Did they see anything? Were they involved? These are the questions that have driven this investigation, and we will explore them in the upcoming chapters. They say that the most shocking discoveries are never loud ones. They are quiet, subtle things that you almost miss unless you look with the right eye. That's exactly how the entrance to Rick Harrison's underground tunnels revealed itself. Not with drama, not with alarms blaring, or a keyboard hidden behind a painting, but with a thin crack in the floor, misaligned with the rest of the wall paneling. The team had scoured the property for hours, room by room, drawer by drawer. What we expected to find were filing cabinets, possibly encrypted drives, evidence relating to money laundering and trafficking charges brought against Rick. But no one was prepared for what appeared behind a sliding false panel in a tool storage room, where a stack of seemingly old crates had been deliberately arranged to block the view of a rusted square metal trap door at the edges. But unmistakably, it had been used, and the hinges had recently been oiled. Someone had been down there. When the first bolt was undone, an odd sound echoed, not the screech of metal you'd expect, but something that muffled the noise, as if the door gently closed somewhere below. At first, there was no smell, just the musty air, stagnant from years of no movement. But when the shield was fully opened, the stench of decay rushed into the damp concrete mold, and beneath it, something clearer. Plastic and old metal, the guilty remains of abandoned toys. A few agents exchanged looks, one swearing, another flipping on a flashlight and shining it down the hole. A narrow staircase curved down, made of thick concrete, built deep into the earth like a bunker, with no handrails, no light except what we brought with us. The silence was absolute. Not even the hum of electricity, just the air, still thick, waiting for the slow descent, each step calculated with precision. Only when everyone in the room had reached the edge, the deeper we went, the colder it got, did the staircase end at a sealed metal door with no handle on the outside. But someone or something had installed a hidden push latch in the wall. The door opened without resistance, and what lay inside was not just a basement, but an entirely separate world. The first room was almost too large for an underground space, about 30 ft long and 15 ft wide, with walls painted in a faded blue, peeling in places, but clearly meant to be bright and inviting at one time. The walls were adorned with children's drawings, flowers, a smiling sun, stick figures holding hands. It could have been mistaken for a kindergarten space, if not for the overwhelming sense of decay and the complete lack of any signs that children had ever used it. On the left, there was a small, child-sized table with a plastic tea set, a faded coloring book, and crayons worn down to stubs. Behind a shelf of stuffed animals, all facing outward, all intentionally arranged, a rocking horse stood in the corner, the kind you'd find in a 1950s Sears catalog, but one of its wooden ears was cracked, hanging loosely by a piece of wood. Then there were the cameras. They weren't hidden in this room, not like the others mounted in plain sight above corners with thin wires leading into the walls. They didn't blink, they didn't make noise, but they were there, pointing directly at the play area. Someone had been watching deeper into the tunnels. Clearly, this wasn't just a room, but a network of branching corridors, low ceilings, no windows, thick walls, soundproofed. Each room was decorated differently. One room had pink walls, a wardrobe labeled with unicorns and hearts, and a closet full of costumes. Princess dresses, small police uniforms, doctor outfits, all sized for children aged 4 to 7 years old. But once again, there were no signs of actual children, no clothes worn from use, no drawings that looked real. Instead, everything had the feel of being staged, designed, a manufactured version of innocence, a version that raised more questions with every step. Why would Rick Harrison, a grown man with no young children in his household, need a space like this? He opened a drawer in a small nightstand. Inside were dozens of photos, not of people, but of toys. They were cataloged, numbered, logged as if they were part of an inventory system. Many of the toys in the photos matched those found in the room. Someone had taken the time to record them, preserve them, with no fingerprints on the most commonly handled items, no DNA from children, nothing but dust and the eerie feeling that everything had been kept clean, not for comfort, but for secrecy. The room next door had padded walls, a small sink in the corner, no toys, just a mattress on the floor, still in its plastic cover. Attached to the wall was another camera, and beneath it, an intercom control panel. One of the agents pressed the button, but there was no response. The intercom system was dead. But what disturbed us the most wasn't the technology, but the scrawled writing on the wall behind the bed frame. The shaky, uneven letters, as if they were carved with a blunt object to write simple words, "Don't forget the game." No one spoke for a moment. No one wanted to be the first to say what we all were thinking. This wasn't just a strange architectural project or a forgotten experiment. This was a space designed with purpose, a dark purpose. The deeper we went, the more that purpose revealed itself. The last room we entered that day was the furthest and coldest from the entrance. The air here was still thick, suffocatingly stale. We had to pry open a door that had swelled from years of dampness. It creaked loudly, and the sound echoed down the hallway as if something was waking up inside. The empty room had almost nothing but a single chair bolted to the floor, one dim light flickering above, and a small wooden crate with a camera pointed at it. No toys, no drawings, just that single chair. This was not a child's room. It was a staging area, an interrogation point, or worse. By that point, the raid had shifted from gathering evidence to a live crime scene. Forensics had been called in. Luminol tests revealed traces of biological material at certain corners of the walls, some fingerprints that didn't match, not completely, but enough. The tunnel was declared a restricted area, and the estate was sealed indefinitely. Outside, the sun still shone, the world still vibrated. Tourists still took pictures outside the pawn shop, unaware that miles below the neatly trimmed grass, something terrible had been discovered. The media wouldn't hear about it until many days later, by which time the public story was still catching up with the reality of the charges. But for those of us who walked through that darkness, who felt its weight, who saw the empty beds and the staged innocence, we knew there was something much bigger hidden beneath the surface. Rick Harrison's tunnels were not just strange, but not just secret either. They were built to conceal, and the truth they concealed was just beginning to surface. The moment you stepped into the first playroom, your mind rebelled against what your eyes were telling you. It seemed innocent, sweet, but there was something in your gut that twisted as you fully comprehended it. Too perfect, too clean, too staged. You have to understand, by the time we stepped into that space, we had already seen other rooms below ground, some built like bunkers. Others were empty hallways or strange concrete rooms with odd surveillance setups. But this room was different. It was warm, colorful, lined with soft foam carpet and pastel colors, with glittering curtains on fake windows leading nowhere, stars twinkling in the dark. The air faintly scented with lavender and fabric softener, and the completely unsettling feeling as you leaned against the far wall was a small room. The bookshelf was filled with children's books. The Very Hungry Caterpillar, Goodnight Moon, a few Explorer bookends, and even a Dr. Seuss shelf, the covers still intact, some with price tags still on. In the middle of the room, there was a small, round plastic table surrounded by little red, blue, yellow, and green chairs, coloring books neatly arranged in a row, each crayon sharpened, each page still blank. It didn't look like a room where children had ever played. It looked like a room someone wanted you to believe children had once played in. On the other side of the room was a miniature wardrobe filled with costumes, superhero capes, princess dresses, lab coats, and animal onesies, all sorted by size, all freshly washed, no signs of wear, no rips, no stains, no fabric pulled. Just rows of little outfits for children to imagine. One agent bent down to inspect a tiny glittering shoe. It was a pink glitter tin box, still intact, with a faded card inside with the name Gracie written in permanent marker, but no one knew a Gracie. There were no records of any child living at or visiting the property, no legal guardianship forms, no visitor logs, nothing but that name. The deeper we went, the more troubling the details became. In one of the wardrobe drawers, we found dozens of hair ties, some still attached to strands of hair. Not enough to directly identify DNA, but enough to confirm human use. Beneath the drawer was a child's journal, but the writing inside was odd. Some pages contained what looked like ordinary scribbles or handwriting practice, but others had full, disjointed, frantic paragraphs, often repeating, "I want to go home right now. I want to go home right now. I want to go home right now," repeating on a single page in red ink. 78 pages with the same words that he had said in the special edition. Of course, we took the journals, cataloged them, sent them to behavior specialists, but even without official analysis, the message is chilling. Someone wrote these things as a perverse fabrication, or someone small and terrified, trapped in this nightmare, trying to record their voice on paper. But there were no fingerprints on the journal covers, no identifiable handwriting, no DNA on the pages, almost as if someone had wiped them clean. This wasn't a mess left behind. This was a main presentation in that room. One of the forensic psychologists who accompanied our team, Dr. Leon Gibbs, spoke up. He had worked on human trafficking and cult abuse cases for over 20 years. He spoke softly. "This is not a playroom. This is a performance space." Someone was arranging childhood here like a set designer. We found 4 more rooms like this, each with its own theme. One room was designed like a miniature classroom, complete with a whiteboard, a fake attendance list, and alphabet blocks on the walls. Another room mimicked a nursery nap room, with several cribs, thin blankets, and a white noise machine still plugged in. One room was even set up like a birthday party, with used streamers hanging and party hats scattered on the floor, an unopened party supply kit lying on a folding table. But the most bizarre thing above all was the absence of any digital devices in these rooms. No iPads, no TVs, no electronics that children might normally have access to. This was an artificially staged, nostalgic space, a selective simulation of childhood untouched by the modern world. What's the purpose? There are theories, and none of them are comforting. Some members of the FBI team believe these rooms were used as grooming environments, spaces designed to disarm victims, making them feel safe before being exploited. Others think it might be psychological manipulation, an environment built to confuse memory and perception. Some are terrified that the rooms were part of a sick, imaginary space not meant for children, but for adults to observe children in that context. And when we found the viewing room, those suspicions grew. It was a narrow room just behind the wall of the main playroom, with a one-way mirror looking into the main area. In this small viewing space, there were 4 folding chairs arranged in a row, like front-row seats at a show. A camera was mounted on the ceiling, and a notebook was placed on a side table with timestamps and handwritten observation notes. Page 1. The topic is a princess dress, speaking for 13 minutes, seeming hesitant to follow the script. Page 3. The subject doesn't respond to sound stimuli, today suggesting the use of sedatives. The pages continued like that, cold, clinical, and chilling. Who wrote them? We didn't know at that moment, but the handwriting was later compared with records found in Rick Harrison's office safe upstairs, and the match was confirmed. The first room, the last time before it was locked up for forensic preservation, had something cling to us, a smell that could or had been waiting during that final walk. We noticed something strange that somehow we had missed before. Faint scratches inside the cabinet door as if fingernails had scratched it, as if someone had been locked inside. We measured the depth. They were made recently. Anyone who had been in there hadn't left for a long time, and that raised the most chilling question of all. Had children ever been found? None of us said it out loud at first, but the implications still hung heavy in the room. Were we looking at a space where children were hidden, used, sold, killed, or were these rooms built for a completely different purpose? Something even worse? That's what we would uncover next when the agents finally entered the place they later called the evidence room. No one was prepared for the true scale of what had been stored inside. Unlike the playroom or the observation room, this part of the tunnel network wasn't painted brightly or staged as a children's sanctuary. It was simple industrial cement walls, shelves bolted to the floor, heavy-duty file cabinets stacked together, each locked with rusted padlocks. There were bins, containers, and boxes labeled biological hazard, some still bearing foreign customs tape, neatly arranged in the corner of the room. There were 14 hard drives. This was the heart of the operation, not just the physical space, but the digital storage, the ledgers, the safes, the secret detention room no one was allowed to see. One by one, the bins and cabinets were opened and documented by the forensic team. Everything had to be photographed before it could be touched, but even a quick glance at what they found pointed to something far beyond Rick Harrison, who was simply a man with troubling hobbies. These weren't random items. These were systematically stored, managed, organized, and calculated pieces of evidence. One of the first discoveries was a collection of passports, dozens of them, issued in countries around the world: Romania, Thailand, Nigeria, Colombia, Moldova, and many photos belonging to minors, some expired, others without stamps. But their names told the story. Some were flagged in the International Missing Children database. Then came the photos. Over 300 printed photos, sealed in plastic bags, organized by date and subject number. Most of the faces were blurred or obscured, perhaps intentionally or due to poor lighting, but the context was strangely familiar. The same underground playroom we had just passed through, the same toy, the same outfit, the photos labeled with coded notes. The final observation had no warmth in the documents, no empathy, just a catalog. In the far corner of the biometric locked steel cabinet was a stash of compact recording devices, handheld cameras, night vision lenses, motion sensors, and portable transmitters. Some devices seemed customized, others were commercially available but heavily modified to hide inside everyday items. There were stuffed animals with transmitters sewn into pacifiers with integrated microphones, and even a plastic cup with a straw hollowed out to conceal a tiny lens. Why would someone go to the trouble of hiding surveillance equipment inside children's toys? The question lingered in the air like poison. Then came the journals. This time, not fake children's notebooks, but carefully organized financial ledgers. Every column aligned, every transaction labeled, thousands of entries across multiple notebooks, but they weren't in English. They were written in a cipher, a code matching older forms of criminal activity, the shorthand used by international smuggling organizations. The FBI forensic accounting team immediately flagged the entries for decoding. The initial translation revealed numbers linked to names, dates, and what appeared to be destinations. Some destinations matched known human trafficking corridors, some were ports, others, disturbingly, were five-star hotels in places like Dubai, Miami, and Istanbul. Don't forget to leave a comment with the number 1 if you sympathize with Mike Wolf, or number 0 if you have a different opinion. That was when it became clear. This wasn't just a private dungeon. It was a stop on a route, a link in a chain. One of the most disturbing items came from a black-locked container lying beneath a tarp. Inside were folders, each marked with alphanumeric codes and a symbol. Inside the folders were printed psychological records, with names redacted but containing notes such as the subject's responses to reward cycles, reactions to a mother's tone, and fear responses triggered by the sound of a door. Who wrote these things, and what were they for? Each report was signed with the same initials, RH. This wasn't Rick Harrison's assets and name. It was just him participating, him observing, him logging on the digital front. The hard drives were seized and sealed immediately. Federal analysts began restoring data within 24 hours. What they found was later classified and sealed behind many levels of legal restrictions. But from a few insiders who spoke off the record, we learned that there were folders matching the physical image codes, files with hour-long video recordings of children in the same room we had walked through. Some of them were acting, reciting lines, others sitting still. Speaking at all, a source revealed that the files were clearly part of a grooming protocol. Even more disturbing were the file names: Session 1, Initial Compliance Session, Session 3, Resistance Session, 9, Ready for Transport. Each video, each photo, each line in those ledgers continues to shed light on the public image of a man who until now had been regarded as nothing more than a savvy businessman with a film crew. At one point, an agent happened upon a folder labeled Inheritance Assets. Inside were photos and names of adults, mostly women. Each file included contextual data, financial information, and notes like converted, non-compliant, or reassigned. These were not just victims, but possibly recruiters, survivors who had turned participants into broken people, transformed into cogs in a malicious machine. Another trash bin was found near the wall at the back, filled with identification cards, school ID cards, library cards, all belonging to individuals under 18 years old. Some were bent, broken, or scratched, while the names on others remained intact. Some agents couldn't complete the room scan. They had to breathe a sigh of relief. One was seen crying uncontrollably in the hallway outside. Another was vomiting in the driveway. This was not just a crime scene. This was a mass trauma site. Perhaps the most haunting artifact in the entire evidence room was a single framed photo, carefully placed in the corner near a filing cabinet. It was a picture of a young Rick Harrison smiling, standing next to two people with scratched faces, his arm around a child. It wasn't a famous family photo, not one used on Pawn Stars. This was a deliberately personal image, hidden away. The frame had a quote engraved on the wood with a knife: "The family we choose never leaves." To this day, no one knows exactly who the people in that photo are, but the message and placement told investigators everything they needed to know. This wasn't just a business, it was a belief, it was a ritual, it was a legacy. As we cataloged the room and sealed it, one of the senior agents turned to me and said something I would never forget. "This room isn't evidence. It's a blueprint. A blueprint for how evil can be disguised, labeled, stored, and hidden behind steel doors. A blueprint for how a man like Rick Harrison can live two lives, one in front of the camera lens and one beneath the floorboards in the dark." And what was found here would lay the foundation for an international investigation that would shake not just the reputation of a single man, but it was about to tear open the gates to something much larger. Following the money, that is one of the oldest investigative strategies in the book. Whether you're dealing with organized crime, terrorism, or high-level corruption, the truth always comes with a price, and money leaves footprints that even the most calculated crime can't be completely erased, and in the case of Rick Harrison, those footprints stretched far beyond Las Vegas and the familiar world of pawn shops, reality TV, and collectibles. What investigators found in his financial history would ultimately prove more condemning than any item found in the underground tunnels. The money not only exposed his guilt, but hinted at something even more terrifying. Rick Harrison was not acting alone. It began with a flag raised by a federal financial crime unit long before any tunnels were discovered or evidence rooms were opened. There was a discrepancy in Rick's tax filings, which, according to a forensic analyst in Washington, D.C., didn't match the income and deductions Rick reported. Rick should have been operating at a much smaller profit margin than his lifestyle and spending patterns suggested, renting private jets, investing in high-end real estate, purchasing rare collectibles worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then making wire transfer payments that didn't match any visible services or products exchanged. The first alarming payment was a $650,000 transfer from a shell company registered in Beas, a company with no website, no employees, and no recorded activity outside of that single transaction. Yet the money was disbursed within 48 hours and deposited into one of Rick's subsidiary businesses, a fake auction company that existed only on paper. From there, the money was split into smaller amounts and distributed to several other companies Rick owned or secretly linked to. This was classic money laundering behavior, and the financial investigation quickly expanded. More than 30 shell companies were identified, registered under fake names or proxies, most in high-secrecy jurisdictions: the Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, Panama, Cyprus, and Seychelles. These weren't just shady addresses, but ghost companies used to hide the origin and destination of large sums of money, moving between accounts faster than any legitimate business could justify. Investigators worked backwards to trace those financial arteries to see where the money went. What they discovered was alarming. Some of the companies Rick transferred money to had connections to known human trafficking operations. 2 companies had been flagged in Europol investigations involving the illegal movement of minors across borders under the guise of modeling agencies and educational exchange programs. Another company had previously been involved in an FBI sting that led to the arrest of a human trafficking ringleader in Turkey. And the frequency of the transactions was as suspicious as their scale. Instead of transferring money once, Rick's network used a tactic called structuring. Dozens of smaller transactions just below the reporting threshold to avoid automatic detection. Like tracking a criminal hiding in plain sight, each step was carefully designed to seem insignificant when viewed in isolation, but when connecting the dots, investigators screening the sample also discovered that many of the transactions coincided with Rick's international travel dates related to commercial flights, private jets, and even covert border crossings in Europe on 2 separate occasions. Countries have recently witnessed a sharp spike in child trafficking, with rumors of underground clinics and adoption frauds running rampant. One of the most chilling discoveries came from a bank in Macau, where investigators uncovered a previously unknown trust fund linked to Rick's name. This trust fund held over $11.3 million in untraceable cryptocurrency. The wallet addresses had received deposits from more than 400 anonymous sources, most originating from dark web nodes, later linked to human trafficking markets. This trust fund wasn't just a piggy bank. It was a war fund for something with a dangerous global structure. Even more disturbing were the encrypted memos related to certain wire transfers. One memo read, "Shipment G3 confirmed, route approved, no deviation from contact with the U.S. will be received." Another memo attached to a $90,000 deposit simply stated that 2 clients had a 48-hour final payment deadline. Who were these clients? What was being transported, and how many others were involved? Eventually, the IRS, Department of Homeland Security, and Interpol were drawn into the financial investigation. Their job wasn't just to track the money, but to build a prosecution roadmap to prove that Rick wasn't just an accomplice, but the center of a business built on exploitation. A financial investigator who had worked on the Bernie Madoff case years ago commented that Rick's network was more sophisticated, more layered, and ultimately more insidious than anything he'd seen in an economic case. This wasn't just about embezzlement or hidden income. It was about using financial systems to move human lives as assets on a balance sheet, and it all linked back to Rick's legitimate empire, the pawn shop. Long praised as the heartbeat of Las Vegas pawn culture, it was revealed that it wasn't just a tourist trap. Multiple wire transfers had gone through the store's business accounts. Investigators uncovered fake receipts, duplicate entries, and padding expenses acting as a cover for real money moving through the system. Rick even created fake invoices for recovery services and consulting fees to explain the appearance of funds. Then there were the cash movements over the past 5 years. The shop had reported unusually high cash inflows, far exceeding what foot traffic could reasonably explain. Audits showed large cash bundles were brought in to be exchanged for goods, which were then sold off in off-the-record transactions, bypassing tax documents. Those goods turned out to never have actually been shipped or received. They were just temporary names on the ledger to justify the movement of money, which was in fact used to pay for something else. But perhaps the most chilling revelation came when a forensic accountant connected a series of charitable donations made through one of Rick's funds to front organizations, essentially shell nonprofits. These organizations claimed to be building schools or funding children in developing countries, but they didn't exist. The addresses listed were for abandoned warehouses, the board members were fabricated, and the donations were used to purchase unchecked international flight tickets, some under the names of missing minors. That was when the case no longer revolved solely around Rick Harrison. It expanded. Subpoenas were issued to business partners, bank executives were interrogated, and lawyers linked to Rick's offshore activities were summoned before federal judges. The financial network had touched dozens of people, many of whom had no idea they were participating in something so grotesque. Others knew, and their silence made them accomplices. At the center of it all, however, Rick was not just a name on a document. He was someone who signed every wire transfer, had his fingerprints on every approval, someone who didn't just facilitate the system but built it. And the most damning part was the timeline matching the financial traces. Every time a suspicious wire transfer was recorded, there was a real-world match, whether it was a hidden room equipped with newly installed cameras or a shipment arriving at midnight. All of it was connected, painting the picture of a man who turned his wealth into a weapon, someone skilled in the art of camouflage, not only of himself but everything horrific he built under his own roof. As investigators completed linking the financial trails, the charges were upgraded. Rick Harrison was no longer just accused of money laundering, but also of funding and managing an international human trafficking operation. At first, they always suspected something was wrong, but eventually, many former employees, associates, and seasonal workers of Rick Harrison easily pushed aside their discomfort. He was a famous man, constantly surrounded by cameras, media attention, and fans. Eccentric behavior was expected, privacy was expected, demanding secrecy, restricting access to certain rooms, strange overnight construction projects. These things were strange but not entirely unreasonable for a man of Rick's stature. But in hindsight, each of those moments would take on a darker tone when news of Rick's arrest broke and the horrifying discoveries under his estate came to light. Some former employees, assistants, and contractors began to speak out, and as their testimonies began to build on one another, investigators realized that the truth had been hidden right before their eyes for years. The first to speak up was a woman named Angela Torres. She had worked for Rick as a live-in housekeeper and part-time cook for less than 4 months in 2021. She had been hired through a third-party staffing agency in California with promises of high wages, full accommodation, and flexible hours. At first, everything seemed fine until she was told there were parts of the house she wasn't allowed to clean. "There was a basement I'd never seen," Angela explained in a recorded interview. "I wasn't even informed about it during my orientation, but one day I asked where I could find the laundry, and Rick became very tense. He told me one part of the house didn't concern me, to stay away from it." His voice changed, and I remember the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Angela also claimed that she had seen Rick burning something in a large metal drum behind the warehouse late at night. "It smelled like plastic and chemicals, not like trash," she said. "I didn't ask any questions, but I knew something was off." She was fired 3 days after that incident with a check and a warning to forget what she saw. She hadn't said anything at the time due to fear, but when she saw news about the arrest, she realized she might not be the only one. Then came Marcus Wynn, a repairman who had worked on Rick's property on a 6-week contract in 2020. His job was to install drywall and do electrical work in what he was told was an expansion project for the storage basement beneath the house. He was paid in cash, with no official paperwork filed. Strange but not unusual for short-term labor jobs. Marcus recalled being escorted to the job site every day and being forbidden from going into the tunnels alone. "There was always someone watching me work," he said. "Even when I went to the bathroom, there was a guy standing by the door. Rick only came by once, but he looked at everything like he was inspecting a surgical room. He wanted every corner sealed, no gaps, no vents leading outside. That wasn't a basement. That was a bunker." He described the walls being installed with soundproofing and wiring designed for continuous surveillance. He had asked what the room was going to be used for out of curiosity. His supervisor had said, "You don't want to know, just finish the job." That was all I needed to hear. Marcus left early and never returned, even losing his final week's pay. His contract was terminated without any explanation. Another former worker, a young IT technician named Joey Barta, claimed he was brought in to install a closed-circuit security system. Inside Rick's house, he was told that it was the storage space for his personal art collection and that no data was stored on the cloud. When he asked why, he was told, "This isn't where you should be asking questions." But what troubled him the most was what he saw when reviewing the security feeds to calibrate the system. There were feeds from cameras inside rooms that looked like a daycare or preschool. I asked, "Why are there playrooms if no children live here?" The guy following me said, "Don't worry about it, it's for guests." Joey knew something was wrong, but didn't have enough evidence to report to the police. After being arrested, he provided the federal agents with a copy of the original system architecture and the timestamp from the last known feed. However, the most painful testimony came from someone much closer to Rick, his former personal assistant, who asked to remain anonymous for safety reasons. She had worked for Rick for over 2 years. Her duties ranged from managing appointments and emails to grocery shopping and arranging his travel. But it was the private tasks that started to raise her suspicions. He had me book tickets for someone with no ID, no last name, just a name and a destination. I asked how I could do that, and he handed me a disposable prepaid phone and told me to call a contact. I called, and the man on the other end didn't even hesitate. He just said, "Use the parcel forwarding system labeled as antique transfer." That was when she realized this wasn't just the eccentricity of a celebrity, but a crime hidden behind the charm. She remained silent because of fear. Rick was a powerful man with many connections, and he knew the system to keep everyone quiet. But her silence turned into guilt, and when she saw the pictures of the underground rooms on the news, she collapsed. I remember picking up teddy bears for him, dozens of them. I thought they were for donation to some project. Now I wonder if I was handing reminders for something far worse. These things were not isolated. Accounts, many former associates began stepping forward. A private driver was directed to take clients to a nondescript entrance behind the estate. A delivery driver recalled delivering boxes labeled as stage closets at midnight. A neighbor saw children being loaded into an unmarked truck. The stories began to echo. Different people, different timelines, the same pattern. They all noticed the secrecy, they all saw strange behavior, and they all felt that they were being used, whether as tools or distractions to maintain the illusion. The authorities now had more than just paperwork. They had witnesses, victims, insiders, and their accounts filled in the gaps left by numbers and photos. Rick Harrison seemed to not act completely in the dark. He allowed glimpses of small cuts and a carefully curated image now shedding light on his entire legacy. What these former employees describe, what they saw, what they smelled, what they felt in their bones, fits with something terrifying. The truth is, the tunnels were not built in isolation, but were expanded, cleaned, modified, and monitored by maintenance staff, and nothing happened without others being complicit or at least turning a blind eye. This raises questions that investigators are still struggling to answer. How many people knew? How many people stayed silent? And how many stories like this are still waiting to be told? For many years, Rick Harrison was considered one of the most genuine personalities on reality TV, known for his bluntness in dealing and his eccentricity when interacting with tourists and treasure hunters. He was the type of celebrity who didn't seem like a celebrity. Fans called him approachable, a regular guy who just happened to own a pawn shop and became famous doing what he loved. That very image made the truth difficult to accept for the public. Because Rick Harrison, the star of Pawn Stars, the smiling face in every ad, the man who worked with his son and laughed on set, was not the person federal investigators knew. The public version had been carefully constructed, and it wasn't an easy facade to crack. But when it cracked, the reality beneath was horrifying. One of the most chilling aspects of this case was how convincingly Rick's double life fooled the public. He embodied the American dream, born in Lexington, North Carolina, raised in a working-class family. He built a business from the ground up with his father. He turned a struggling pawn shop into a multi-million-dollar empire, attracting the attention of producers who turned his family business into a phenomenon on the History Channel, with millions of viewers tuning in weekly. Tourists flocked to the gold and silver pawn shop in Las Vegas, often hoping to catch a glimpse of Rick or his son, Corey. Rick welcomed them with open arms. He had spoken at conferences, written a best-selling autobiography, and even given inspirational speeches on entrepreneurship, resilience, and integrity. However, the picture was very different. Internal documents, hidden surveillance footage, and encrypted communications painted a much darker portrait. While the world saw a man who loved rare artifacts and coins, investigators saw a man using that very business as a front, a place where artifacts were exchanged not just for cash, but for silence and information. And when it became a crime too terrible to speak of, what struck many observers was how Rick used his persona so casually. His public persona wasn't just a facade, it was a shield, a buffer that allowed him to deflect suspicion for years. Who would suspect a man who made people laugh on cable TV? Who would interrogate a family man running a pawn shop that had become a tourist attraction? The intrigue began when investigators started comparing Rick's off-camera activities with the timeline on camera, revealing discrepancies. There were long gaps in his filming schedule, trips labeled as business opportunities that were never recorded in the official production notes. His unexplained absences were always covered up with quick jokes or vague excuses. One Pawn Stars producer later agreed to cooperate with investigators, noting that Rick often insisted on controlling his own schedule, and certain days were marked as off-limits without any explanation. He claimed he would be going to a supplier in Utah or to check a private collection, but the producer recalled he never returned with anything. No footage, no artifacts, just behind-the-scenes stories. Rick was known to be intense, not abusive, not overly controlling, but methodical. Everything on the show had to reflect well on him. He often demanded hot footage if he felt his tone wasn't right or if a deal didn't make him look smart. His control extended beyond the context. One staff member recalled Rick having two distinct voices, a TV voice and his real voice. They said it was unsettling. On camera, he was friendly, warm, and sometimes sarcastic. Off camera, he was cold, sharp, measured, almost rehearsed. The most shocking evidence of Rick's double life, however, came from digital forensics agents. They discovered two separate digital identities Rick maintained across multiple devices. One identity was linked to his public business transactions, emails, contracts, communications with TV producers, and antique suppliers. The rest was encrypted and buried beneath layers of decoy software containing logs that could only be described as a parallel life. Names, dates, passwords for hidden accounts, transaction histories, videos never aired, documents no one was allowed to see. In those hidden files, Rick didn't use his full name. He signed as RH32, a code name directly linked to the encrypted files found in the tunnel network. That's when investigators discovered that Rick had created two versions of himself over decades. One that thrived under the bright studio lights, and one that operated in the dark. Psychologists consulted on the case stated that it's not uncommon for individuals involved in long-term criminal activity, especially human trafficking, to develop split personalities. They call it functional psychopathology, where a person maintains a fully convincing social persona while engaging in behaviors most would consider bizarre. But Rick took that contrast to the extreme. He didn't just hide his true self. He benefited from deception. The more his fans adored him, the more invincible he became. Every appearance on television, every handshake, every photo taken with tourists reinforced the illusion and allowed him to operate under the radar. Even now, after his arrest and the mounting disturbing evidence against him, there are still people refusing to believe the truth. Some fans believe he was framed. Others say it's all a misunderstanding. That's the power of persona. When someone builds a character so familiar that it's accessible, we forget they're still human and thus capable of doing evil. In fact, Rick Harrison didn't just live a double life. He built an empire with one hand and buried crimes with the other. He smiled at customers on the pawn shop floor while deals were funneled through shell companies beneath the surface. He posed for photos with children outside the shop, while agents were now searching for the identities of children who may never be seen again. The most haunting part of this investigation wasn't just what Rick did, but how he managed to evade justice for so long. Because when someone smiles in front of the camera long enough, we stop questioning what they do when the lights go off. At first, authorities believed Rick Harrison might be an outlier, an exception, a man with too much money, too much privacy, and a dark impulse hidden beneath a charming exterior. But the deeper they dug into his finances, communications, and activities, the more it became clear. This wasn't the work of a lone man operating in a vacuum. This was a hub, a central figure in a much larger and more complex system. It started with Rick's financial modus operandi: shell companies, layered transactions, offshore holdings. Nothing was crude. This wasn't sloppy money laundering or opportunistic exploitation. It was precisely structured and almost certainly built by someone with deep knowledge of financial systems. Within the Department of Homeland Security, linking multiple connections to known money laundering operations in Europe and the Middle East, some of which had been broken up in earlier sting operations over the past decade. What was alarming was how closely Rick's network mirrored those cases. Using obscure organizations, repurposing legitimate business fronts like his pawn shop, and utilizing third-party logistics companies with no physical presence, all indicating a linked infrastructure. It mirrored the tactics used by human trafficking rings operating between Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe. That's when international agencies got involved. Interpol began collaborating with U.S. authorities to examine the transfer flags from Rick's shell companies to organizations in Moldova, Bulgaria, and northern Thailand, areas known to be hotspots for global child trafficking. Many of these organizations had previously appeared on watch lists, but had never been officially linked to U.S. suspects. However, through Rick, the connections had now become direct. One of the more troubling discoveries came from a Romanian child protection nonprofit, which had received 3 donations from an entity controlled by Rick on paper. This nonprofit seemed legitimate. It had a website, images of smiling children, testimonials from supposed donors, but an actual investigation found that the building listed as the organization's headquarters was abandoned, and the people in the photos on the website were stock images used without consent. Further investigation revealed that the same Romanian nonprofit had received donations from 4 other shell companies connected to U.S. citizens, all of whom had been charged or were under suspicion in prior human trafficking investigations. The connection surfaced in Turkey, where authorities raided a private estate suspected of operating as a holding facility for trafficked minors. Inside the house, Agents found photos of a U.S. man later confirmed to be Rick Harrison, one where Rick stood in front of a black SUV with foreign plates. In another photo, he was sitting at a table in a restaurant with two individuals who were already on Interpol's watch list for trafficking and exploitation. None of these photos had ever appeared in the media. They weren't social or typical promotional shots. They were buried in encrypted data folders recovered from a seized laptop belonging to one of the Turkish suspects. Rick had been there not just once, but several times. The more the investigators uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Rick was not a low-level agent or fringe participant. He was a person with access, someone who operated across multiple countries, with activities matching those of senior coordinators. Digital evidence further confirmed this theory. Inside Rick's hidden servers, found concealed in a false wall near his home office, were missing encrypted conversations, messages protected by advanced private encryption systems typically used by spy agencies or darknet providers. With the help of cybercrime experts, analysts were able to decrypt some of the message chains. The conversations discussed delivery times, cleanup schedules, and inventory turnover. The terms weren't immediately incriminating, but were highly suspicious when cross-referenced with names, flight data, and routing codes. One conversation referenced a Las Vegas base being shut down and mentioned transferring assets to a contact in Naples. Federal agents quickly began investigating the location in Naples, Florida, only to discover a property owned by an offshore trust, linked to the same legal agency that helped Rick set up one of his shell companies in Bice. It wasn't just the new financial connections that mattered, but also the repeated use of the same legal support entity, the same bank, the same fake non-profit organization, all operating across borders and identities, all protected by similar means. The layers of concealment in the case expanded rapidly. U.S. agents are now working in coordination with law enforcement agencies in at least 9 countries. Some mid-level agents in Eastern Europe were arrested after being found moving minors with forged documents originating from suppliers whose emails were found on Rick's encrypted drive. These suppliers were not just contacts, but partners. They forwarded scanned documents to Rick, he responded. He sent money, and they executed one of the most reprehensible transactions. One of the most damning links came from a flight manifest discovered by a whistleblower inside a private jet charter company in the Dominican Republic. The records show Rick Harrison had rented a plane under an alias twice, traveling to and from the island with 3 passengers who had fake names and no official birth records. Those names later matched with missing children listed in the UN registry. To clarify, this was no longer just suspicion. This was hard evidence, evidence from multiple agencies. The theory now is that Rick became involved in a human trafficking supply chain, not just to profit from it, but to manage it. Part of his house served as a node in that chain, a processing station, possibly a testing ground, or worse. Investigators also found evidence that Rick's connections extended to South America, specifically Paraguay. Authorities raided a facility claiming to provide adoption services for foreign couples. Among the seized records was a folder labeled Client Harrison, including wire transfer receipts, scanned passports, and travel itineraries. The documents detailed the steps in the child-seeking protocol. These were chilling documents, not fabricated, printed to operational standards. It showed this wasn't a one-time incident. Rick wasn't experimenting, he was a repeat customer. Each international discovery made Rick's arrest seem more like the beginning of a global reckoning than the end of a local investigation, and with every passing day, new names were dragged into the sweep. Lawyers, pilots, foreign banks, business associates, and even entertainers. What began as a shocking raid on a Las Vegas estate has evolved into the exposure of an entire network. And Rick Harrison, the man once seen bargaining for collectible coins and vintage guitars, now stands at the center of a network spanning across continents, moving people like commodities and operating in silence for many years. The most terrifying realization is that for the network to operate for so long, it had to be protected, sheltered not only by money, but also by influence, public image, and societal distraction. Rick's reputation, which once made him untouchable, is no longer intact. The shield he had built over the years has shattered, and the truth is slowly coming to light. Everything Rick had built is starting to crumble, and the layers of secrecy and image laundering are no longer enough to hide the crimes he kept buried. This story is not over yet, and there are many more shocking and intriguing things waiting for you. Don't forget to leave your comment below if you think Rick Harrison is not the person he appears to be. Make sure to like and subscribe